the silent shadow behind the giant. The morning was quiet, almost too quiet as the city of Mountain View began to stir. The sun had just started to rise behind the buildings, casting a golden hue over the glass towers of the tech empire. Sundar Pichai stood by the window of his office holding a warm cup of tea, watching the slow dance of sunlight crawl across the sky. He looked calm, but his mind was anything but. Something felt wrong, and he couldn't quite explain why. Behind, the scenes unseen by the world, was a man named Kabir. For 15 years, Kabir had walked one step behind Sundar. He wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a wall, a shadow, and sometimes even a friend. From bustling airports to tense meetings with world leaders, from private dinners to press conferences where hundreds of eyes stared and cameras clicked, Kabir was always there. Silent, still, alert, always watching, always protecting. Kabir was the kind of man who didn't speak unless it was absolutely necessary. He had a sharp jawline, graying hair at the sides, and eyes that seemed to scan every room like a radar. He had served in the military before he was hired by Google's private security division. Sundar had personally requested him. Over the years, Kabir had taken a bulletproof briefcase to the chest, tackled a rogue protester in Berlin, and even saved Sundar's daughter from a near car accident, but he never boasted. He never asked for thanks. That morning, as Sundar stared out the window and Kabir stood quietly by the door of the office, a buzz broke the silence. Sundar's assistant, Ria, stepped in nervously. Her voice was low and unsure. "Sir, the head of internal security is here. He says it's urgent." Sundar nodded, unaware that the next 10 minutes would change everything. Two men entered the room. The taller one was John Valentine, the new head of security. He had a sharp suit, slicked back hair, and a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him was a younger assistant holding a tablet. Sundar offered them a seat, but Valentine didn't sit. He glanced at Kabir, then turned to Sundar. "Mr. Pichai, there's been a review of personnel across all high-security departments. Based on updated internal risk assessments, we've decided that it's time for a change." Sundar blinked. "What kind of change?" Valentine's voice was firm. "Kabir is being relieved of duty, effective immediately." The words felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. Sundar stared at him, then looked at Kabir. Kabir didn't flinch. He stood still like a mountain. "On what grounds?" Sundar asked, now more alert. Valentine tapped the tablet and turned it towards Sundar. There were vague terms listed. Compliance review, outdated clearance, procedural risks. Nothing made sense. It was smoke. Shadows. Kabir finally spoke. His voice was deep, steady. "Sir, if I may..." Valentine cut him off. "You're not authorized to speak." That did it. Sundar stood up slowly, placing his tea down. His tone was calm but cold. "In my office, everyone is authorized to speak, especially Kabir." Kabir stepped forward. He didn't defend himself, he didn't argue. Instead, he simply looked Sundar in the eyes. "Thank you for everything, sir. It's been an honor." Then, just like that, he turned around and walked out. No salute, no handshake. Just 15 years of loyalty and sacrifice dismissed in under 5 minutes. As the door clicked shut behind him, a heavy silence settled in the room. Sundar looked down at the tablet again. His mind raced. Something didn't add up. Kabir wasn't just loyal. He was flawless in every report, in every drill. There had never been a single complaint. No mistakes, no risks. So why now? Valentine nodded once and said, "We've already arranged replacement security detail. The transition will be smooth." But Sundar didn't reply. His thoughts were stuck on Kabir's eyes. They didn't look angry. They looked disappointed. Not in Sundar, but in something deeper. Later that night, Sundar sat alone in his home library, the glow of a small lamp casting shadows across the floor. He opened his laptop and began searching. He went through internal records, employee evaluations, even old emails. Everything on Kabir was clean. Too clean, like someone had scrubbed it. A knock came on the door. Ria entered holding an envelope. "Sir, this was left at the front gate. There's no name." Sundar opened it. Inside was a single photo. It was old, faded slightly at the edges. It showed Kabir standing next to a younger Sundar at an overseas summit, smiling for the camera. Behind them, barely noticeable, stood a man in the background, someone Sundar didn't recognize. But the man's face made his chest tighten. There was something sinister in his expression, something that didn't belong in a peaceful photo. On the back of the photo, one sentence was scribbled in pen. "You are being watched more than you realize." Sundar's hand trembled slightly. He looked again at the photo. His eyes narrowed. Something told him this was not about security protocols. This was bigger, deeper, more dangerous than it looked. And Kabir was not the problem. Kabir was the first warning. The truth buried beneath silence. The house was unusually still that morning, and yet Sundar could feel the pressure building in the air like a storm gathering silently above. After reading the message on the back of that old photograph, he hadn't slept. He'd replayed the memory of Kabir walking away a dozen times in his mind. The look in Kabir's eyes, calm but full of warning, now haunted him. It wasn't the look of a man angry at injustice. It was the look of someone protecting something bigger than himself. Sundar sat in his private study, his laptop open, and his fingers hovered over the keys. He had access to information that most people could only imagine. But even as the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, he knew there were places he was not meant to go. Digital rooms locked away with silent keys, secrets kept from even him. But this time he wasn't willing to look away. Not after the way Kabir was dismissed. Not after the message in that envelope. He typed Kabir's full name into the internal archive and activated a deeper-level search. Every official file came up perfect. Background checks, training certifications, psychological assessments. Kabir had passed every single one with excellence, but there was a pattern too perfect, too neat. No minor infractions, no disciplinary reports, not even a basic travel delay or overtime claim. For someone who had served on the front lines of global operations, it didn't make sense. Something was missing. Or worse, something had been erased. He ran a cross-reference against old flight logs, internal calendar meetings, and archived news events. Then it happened. A single entry caught his eye. A private summit in 2012 in Singapore involving a secretive meeting with government advisors and top tech leaders. Kabir had traveled there as part of Sundar's personal security. But unlike other trips, there was no return flight listed under Kabir's name. Only a second listing 2 days later under a different alias. Sundar's heart thudded. Kabir had used a false name to return from a classified event. Why? He picked up the phone and called Ria. "I need everything you can find about the Singapore Tech Summit in 2012, not the public info. Find the guests who weren't officially listed, especially military or intelligence attendees." "Yes, sir," Ria replied quickly, sensing the weight behind his words. While he waited, Sundar returned to the photograph. The man in the background. His face lingered in Sundar's memory. He remembered seeing him just once, years ago, during a cybersecurity conference. No name had been given. Just a nod from a distance and a stare that lasted a few seconds too long. Sundar had assumed he was one of the bodyguards of a diplomat. But now something felt wrong. The man looked like he belonged in the photo, and yet didn't. As if he was planted there deliberately. That same day, Ria returned with an encrypted folder. "Sir, I had to use a back channel, but I found something. A guest list that was removed from the internal archives shortly after the summit. The name you're looking for is on it." She handed him the list. Sundar scanned it. There, toward the bottom, was a name that sent chills through his spine. Caleb Rohn, National Security Liaison, Digital Surveillance Division. The name had been erased from every public document, but Ria had pulled it from a forgotten email backup. Caleb Rohn. That was the man in the photo. And suddenly, it made sense. In 2012, Caleb had been involved in a controversial digital surveillance operation that had been quietly shut down after internal whistleblowers revealed it violated international laws. The program had attempted to plant secret backdoors in commercial software to track citizens globally. It was buried under layers of legal jargon and sealed files. Sundar remembered the outrage when parts of the story leaked, just not Rohn's name. What was Kabir doing with someone like that, and why had he gone silent? That night, Sundar received a strange message from a hidden email address. No subject, line, no signature. Just a short sentence. You're getting close. Be careful who you trust. He read it again. And again. The next morning, Sundar arrived at the office early. He bypassed the elevator and took the stairs up 7 flights, needing the silence to think. When he reached his floor, he found 2 unfamiliar men standing near the hallway. They wore dark suits, held walkie-talkies, and had security badges clipped to their belts. Can I help you? Sundar asked, masking his suspicion. We're part of the new internal protection detail, sir, one replied with a practiced smile. You weren't on the list, Sundar said. We were cleared by head of security, Valentine, the man said calmly. Just a routine update. Sundar walked past them, nodding. But his mind raced. Something was changing. And fast. Inside his office, his phone buzzed. It was a text. No name attached. Meet me at the edge of the marina parking deck. Alone. Midnight. He didn't need to guess who it was. He waited until the end of the day, left his car behind, and took a driverless ride to the marina under a different account. When he arrived, the wind was cold, and the sky was filled with stars. The parking deck was empty, except for one shadow leaning against a pillar. Kabir stepped out of the dark, dressed in plain clothes. His hair was uncombed, his face tired but alert. You shouldn't be here, he said. You left a message, Sundar replied softly. Kabir nodded slowly. I left a warning. That's all it was meant to be. You were never supposed to get involved. Why did you leave? Sundar asked. Kabir looked away. I was forced out, but not by protocol, by design. Someone wanted me gone because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. What did you see? Kabir hesitated. The silence stretched long. Then, slowly, he spoke. In 2012, during that summit, I intercepted a private conversation. Caleb Rohn was speaking with a Google executive, not a small name. One of the original founders. They were discussing something dark. They were planning to activate a silent system inside Android devices, a surveillance chip, real-time location, voice data, all routed through a private server. No user consent, no legal protection. Sundar's stomach twisted. You're saying they were going to spy on billions of people, using our devices? Yes, Kabir said. But it went deeper. They weren't working alone. The funding was coming from outside, military contracts, global interests. And when the leak happened later that year, someone buried the rest of the evidence before it could go public. Sundar was quiet for a long moment. And you? He asked. What did you do? Kabir's voice dropped lower. I recorded the conversation. Then I handed it to a journalist I trusted. 3 days later, that journalist disappeared. No body, no story, just gone. I was warned once, then twice, and now, 15 years later, they're cleaning house one by one. Sundar felt the chill seep into his bones. You still have the recording? Kabir reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a flash drive and handed it over. This is a copy. I don't know how long I'll be safe after tonight, but you need to hear what's on it. And when you do, you'll understand why I stayed silent all these years. Before Sundar could say anything else, Kabir turned and disappeared into the night. Back at home, Sundar plugged the drive into an offline system. He clicked the file. What played next was a conversation caught in hushed tones filled with code names, contract numbers, and one undeniable truth. This wasn't just about data, it was about control. Total, global, digital control. hidden in the palm of every user's hand, and in the final moments of the recording, a voice said clearly, "If Pichai ever finds out, we make sure he stays quiet." Sundar's hands clenched around the desk. Someone in his own company had marked him years ago. Shadows within the glass walls, the night was long and restless for Sundar Pichai. The audio recording played again and again in his mind, echoing louder with each repetition. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about trust, shattered at the highest levels. It was about people he once called mentors and friends discussing his silence like a strategic move on a chessboard. Sundar was a man who had built his life on reason, on transparency, on systems that made sense. But now, none of this made sense. The rules he thought governed his world were being rewritten in the shadows. By dawn, he was no longer questioning if the threat was real. He knew it was. The only question left was, who else was involved? He walked into Google's headquarters that morning, not as a CEO, but as a man stepping into a battlefield. His suit was the same, his smile polite, but his mind was sharper than ever. Every handshake felt heavier, every greeting echoed with suspicion, and the new faces around him, especially the security staff Valentine had brought in, watched him too closely. Ria followed him into his office, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I think someone's been in your office overnight." Sundar froze. "How do you know?" "Your desk drawers were relocked but misaligned," she said, pointing. "And the camera feed for this floor? Missing from midnight to 3 a.m. Sundar didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, staring down at the city below. The very center of innovation, glowing with pride and progress, was hiding something dark beneath its shining surface. "We need to be careful, Ria," he said quietly. "No more digital trails. Anything sensitive? Print it. Deliver it by hand. No emails, no cloud backups, understood?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He turned to her and added, "And one more thing. I need you to find out where Valentine came from, not just his official record. I want to know who recommended him, who signed off on his clearance." Ria didn't ask questions. She simply left, her face set with determination. An hour later, Sundar headed to a meeting on the 27th floor, a quarterly review with the global strategy team. But instead of the usual energy and open discussion, there was an eerie stillness in the room. Several members avoided eye contact, and among them sat a man who hadn't attended these meetings in years, Graham Nolan, a senior advisor and one of the original architects of Google's foundational growth. Graham was older now, his hair white, his voice deeper, but Sundar had once looked up to him as a visionary. "Sundar," Graham said, smiling warmly. "Good to see you. I thought I'd drop in. You know how I love these sessions." "Of course," Sundar replied, though he knew Graham never came to these meetings unless something was wrong. They discussed routine matters, market strategy, data trends, expansion in developing regions. But Sundar could feel the undercurrent. Something was brewing behind the politeness. Every time he spoke, he noticed Graham watching him carefully, as if measuring every word. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Graham lingered. "Walk with me?" he asked casually. Sundar nodded. They strolled down the hallway, passing glass offices and open lounges where young developers typed away on laptops, unaware of the silent war happening just steps away. "You seem tense," Graham said finally. "A lot on my plate," Sundar replied simply. Graham chuckled softly. "Yes, especially with Kabir gone." Sundar stopped walking. "Funny you'd mention him." Graham's face didn't change. "We all have shadows in our past. Sometimes it's better to let them stay buried." "That's not how I work," Sundar said. "Maybe it should be," Graham said, voice turning cold. "You're in a position where your curiosity could be misunderstood." Sundar looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Graham said, stepping closer. "I'm warning you. Stop digging. Some things are bigger than you. Bigger than this company. The people involved. Some of them don't blink before erasing problems." He walked away, leaving Sundar in the hallway, heart pounding. That night, Sundar met Ria in a private co-working space off campus. It was untraceable, owned under a shell company with no public connection to Google. Ria laid out a folder of documents she had gathered. Valentine's file was rewritten 2 years ago, she said. Before that, he was listed under a different agency. Not private security, he was intelligence. A silent branch of a digital operations task force. Black budget. No oversight. Sundar stared at the file. It was clearer now. Valentine hadn't been hired to protect him. He had been planted to monitor him. And the recommendation, Sundar asked, came from Graham Nolan, Ria said. Everything clicked into place. Graham had brought Valentine in. Kabir had been pushed out. And Sundar, he had been kept in the dark the entire time. What about the flash drive? Ria asked, softly. It's safe, Sundar replied. But I need help verifying it. Not here, not in the company. Ria hesitated. Then she said, I know someone. My cousin works at a cyber forensics lab in Stanford. Off the grid. No ties to Google. He owes me. Set it up, Sundar said, as soon as possible. They parted ways that night, both aware that time was slipping fast. But Sundar didn't go home. Instead, he drove through the city in silence until he reached a quiet, empty parking lot near the outskirts. He needed space to think. To breathe, as he sat there, engine off, headlights dim. A tap came on the window. His heart leapt. Kabir stood there in the shadows. Sundar unlocked the door. Kabir got in and said, You've stirred the hive. They know you have the recording. I'm not afraid, Sundar said. Kabir gave him a tired look. You should be. I've seen what these people can do. They don't just erase files, they erase people. So what do we do? Sundar asked. Kabir leaned forward. You go public. Not through traditional media. They control that. But through the people, the engineers, the community, the developers, the very backbone of the tech world. You tell them the truth. They'll call it fake, Sundar said. They'll smear me. Kabir nodded. They might. But they can't erase all of them. There's still honesty in numbers. If you can, get to the right person, someone with reach, someone independent, it can break open. Sundar sat back, mind racing, and then just as suddenly, Kabir pulled out a second drive. This one's stronger. It doesn't just have the audio. It has files, names, funding documents, project details, code strings, everything they tried to bury. Sundar took it, holding it like a bomb. Kabir said, Use it, before they take the choice away from you. Just then, a dark car turned into the lot from the far end. Kabir's head snapped toward it. Go, he said quickly. Now. Sundar started the engine, tires screeching as he drove off. In the rearview mirror, he saw Kabir disappear into the dark again. But something told him. They might not meet again. Betrayal wears familiar faces. The next morning came too. Quickly. The sun outside felt indifferent to the war brewing beneath its light. Inside his office, Sundar sat in stillness, the second flash drive lying on the desk in front of him like a loaded weapon. It was no longer about theory, no longer about suspicion. The data on that drive could burn down reputations, unravel years of polished deception, and expose names the world believed untouchable. But he also knew that the moment it left his hands, he would become a target, more than he already was. Sundar had always been a man of logic. Every major decision in his life had been measured, calculated. But this wasn't a product launch or a business pivot. This was a moment that demanded something deeper. Courage, sacrifice, the kind of boldness that risked everything. He picked up his phone and hesitated for only a second before dialing a number he hadn't called in years. Hello? A voice answered, cautious but calm. It's Sundar, he said. I need to meet now. The voice on the other end paused. Where? Pier 37, backlot. 1 hour. He hung up without another word. This person wasn't from Google. In fact, she had left the tech world entirely. Her name was Anita Khan, a former systems architect at Google, who had exposed data mishandling during her final year and was quietly pushed out, offered a severance package large enough to buy her silence, but she had refused. She had disappeared into the freelance world, working on open-source privacy tools and building a quiet reputation as a voice of integrity. An hour later, Sundar stood by the water, the sound of the waves crashing faintly in the background. The lot was empty except for one car. Anita stepped out wearing a worn gray hoodie and sneakers, her hair tied back. She looked older, maybe wiser, and she was not happy to see him. "You've got nerve calling me," she said flatly. "I know," he replied, "but this is bigger than you and me." She crossed her arms, staring at him. He handed her the drive. "This is what they buried. This is what they tried to kill Kabir over. And if I don't act now, I won't be far behind." Anita took it reluctantly. "What's on it?" "Proof," he said. "Backdoor surveillance programs, illegal funding trails, conversations between founders and intelligence officials. Names, dates, everything." She turned the drive over in her hand. "And you want me to do what? Leak it?" "I want you to verify it first," Sundar said. "I want you to confirm it's real. Unedited. If it checks out, we release it. Not to journalists, not to politicians, but to developers, engineers, students, people who still care about truth." She looked at him for a long time. Then quietly she said, "I'll need 2 days." Sundar nodded. "You've got one." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Still giving deadlines. Some things never change." Before leaving, she added, "Be careful. If you're right about what's on this drive, someone is already watching us." He didn't need her to say it. He felt it. When Sundar returned to the office, Ria was waiting. Her expression was off, nervous, distracted. "What is it?" he asked. "Valentine just asked to see your calendar from the last 48 hours. He wants your meeting history." Sundar stiffened. "Did you give it to him?" "I said the server was down," Ria replied. "But he knows something. I can feel it." Sundar walked to the window and stared out. "It's time we take this higher." He opened his private contact book and found the name of someone he had not spoken to in over a decade. Omar Vazir, the founder of a powerful global tech ethics consortium based in Switzerland, a man with reach, with influence, and most importantly, no ties to Google. He sent a short message: "Need urgent consultation on digital integrity. Full risk. Possible whistleblowing. Are you in?" A reply came within minutes. "Yes, but only in person." Sundar smiled faintly. The world still had people who cared. He booked a private jet for the next evening, listed under a shell travel company not associated with Google. He knew the window was closing. Once he left U.S. airspace with that drive, the silence would break. The masks would fall. But what he didn't know was that the betrayal was already blooming, much closer than he thought. That night, Ria came into the office late. She carried a folder claiming it was background intel on Valentine. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. Sundar didn't notice. His mind was elsewhere. "Thank you," he said, softly. "This will help." Ria hesitated. Then she turned away, hiding her face. 15 minutes later, a quiet message was sent from her phone. It contained 5 words. "He's flying out tomorrow night." In another building miles away, Valentine read the message. He smiled. The next morning, Sundar stepped out of his house with a suitcase. He moved carefully, dressed like any business traveler. The car waiting for him wasn't one of the usual fleet. It was borrowed from an old friend. But before he could reach it, another vehicle pulled up fast behind him. 3 men stepped out. They were not dressed like security. They were not smiling. "Mr. Pichai," one of them said, "you'll need to come with us." Sundar didn't resist. Not yet. They drove him to a quiet office complex outside the city. No logos, no name on the building. Inside, they led him to a conference room. And there, waiting behind the glass table, was Graham Nolan. "You disappoint me, Sundar," he said. "You had a future. All you had to do was stay quiet." "And let you spy on billions of people?" Sundar replied. "Let you sell out privacy for profit?" Graham leaned forward. You think this is about money? This is about control, about global security, about shaping the future before someone else does. You mean enslaving it? Sundar said, eyes burning. Graham sighed. We offered you protection. You turned it down. Now we'll have to contain the damage. He signaled the guards. But before they could move, Sundar pulled something from his coat. Not the flash drive. Just a small pager. He pressed it once. Graham frowned. What is that? Insurance, Sundar said. A dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 2 hours, the entire archive goes public. Not just the drive. Everything, including your offshore bank transfers. Graham's expression changed. You're bluffing, he said, but he wasn't, and they both knew it. After a long silence, Graham nodded slowly. You've made this very difficult. You made it inevitable, Sundar replied. He was released. But, as he stepped outside into the early morning light, a hollow feeling grew in his chest. Something still didn't sit right. When he returned to the office, Ria wasn't at her desk. Her computer was off, her badge deactivated. A note sat on her keyboard. You weren't supposed to know. I'm sorry. His chest tightened. The betrayal had been real, and now he was completely alone. Ghosts return in silence. The office felt like a hollow shell without Raya. Sundar Pichai stood motionless, staring at the note she had left behind. The words were few, but their weight crushed him. You weren't supposed to know. I'm sorry. Betrayal had many faces, but when it came from someone you trusted, someone who had stood beside you through the fire, it burned deeper. Sundar had suspected the walls were closing in. But now it was clear. He wasn't just under attack. He was being hunted by ghosts wearing familiar faces. He picked up the note slowly and folded it, slipping it into his jacket pocket. Emotions pressed against his ribs. Grief, anger, sadness, and something colder. Resolve. He couldn't afford to break now. Not when he was so close to exposing everything. Not when the drive he had given Anita contained the truth that could bring it all down. He left the building through a back exit, avoiding cameras, and took a side street to a waiting car driven by Anita herself. She didn't smile when he entered. Her face was sharp, her eyes even sharper. You were followed, she said, pulling out fast. I know, he replied. They drove in silence for several minutes before she finally spoke again. I decrypted the files. Every single byte checks out, the signatures, the logs, the metadata, it's all real. Sundar turned to her. How bad is it? Bad doesn't cover it, she said. This isn't just one program. It's 6. And not just Android. They were preparing integration into multiple platforms. Payment systems, biometric scanners, even medical records. Your devices weren't just tracking users. They were predicting them, learning from them, manipulating them. Sundar felt sick. But that's not the worst part, she continued. There's a separate branch in the documents labeled Project Nimbus. It's not just surveillance, it's digital control, behavioral steering, through curated ads, notifications, even news feeds. Slow, invisible influence, shaping public opinion without anyone realizing it. Sundar's heart sank. Who approved it? Anita looked him in the eye. Your board, not all of them, but enough. The car stopped in front of a secure underground server facility Anita had borrowed access to from a private academic contact. The building looked abandoned, but below it lived a fortified digital bunker with air-gapped systems designed for maximum secrecy. They entered the elevator and descended in silence. Once inside the main chamber, Anita guided him to a terminal, where she had already preloaded a secure platform, an encrypted broadcast hub used by activists and whistleblowers across the globe. It was untraceable, unhackable, and ready. We're sending this to 25 independent nodes, she said. Some are coders, some are journalists. Some are just citizens who still care. If they receive it, they'll spread it. Sundar hovered his finger over the button-marked send all. But then the screen flickered. A message appeared across the center in red letters. Do not trust her. Anita stepped back. What the hell is that? She asked. Sundar's eyes narrowed. This system's offline. How did anyone send a message? Anita clicked into the logs. Nothing, not a single trace. Then another line appeared. Look behind you. Sundar turned. No one was there. His blood ran cold. The terminal beeped. A name flashed on screen. Encrypted. Scrambled. But Sundar recognized the signature. Kabir. He had hacked the system. This doesn't make sense, Sundar whispered. Anita was shaking her head. This system can't be reached. Unless someone installed a hardware-level exploit. Or unless someone gave them access from inside, Sundar said slowly, locking eyes with her. Anita looked stunned. You think I... But before she could finish, the lights flickered again. A new video feed opened on the screen. Kabir, alive. Face, bruised, breath shallow. But alive, Sundar, he said in a raspy voice. Listen to me. You're in danger. Real danger. Where are you? Sundar asked. Kabir looked to the side as if someone was coming. Anita isn't who she says. She is. She used to work for us before the whistleblowing. It was a cover. She was sent in to test internal resistance. To map the loyalties. Sundar turned to Anita, disbelief crashing into him like a wave. Anita's face twisted, not in surprise, but in sadness. I didn't want to, she said softly. But they found me. Threatened my family. I didn't know you'd come to me. I thought they were bluffing. Until Ria, Sundar stepped back. You handed Ria to them? No, she said quickly. I tried to warn her. She didn't listen. She was followed, and now she's gone. Kabir coughed violently on the screen. Don't trust the leak node, he said. They've hijacked some of the distribution channels. If you send the files through that network, they'll redirect and corrupt them. Anita looked down. I've been monitoring all outbound data. He's not wrong. At least half the nodes are compromised. Sundar stared at the flashing warning on the screen. So what do we do? He asked. Kabir replied. You take the drive. You go yourself. There's a man in Geneva. His name is Lucas Elwood. He runs the Independent Digital Rights Tribunal. They've been collecting evidence for years. Give it to him directly, face to face. Sundar nodded slowly. But how do I get there now? They're watching every move, Anita said quietly. I'll get you to the airport. After that, you're on your own. Sundar looked at her. Betrayed once again. And yet, he saw something else too. Regret. She had made a choice. A terrible one. But she was trying to make it right. They moved fast. Anita burned the systems, destroyed all logs. They used a secondary exit through the service tunnel that led to an old metro line. From there they disappeared into the city's shadows. The plan was simple. Sundar would fly under a new identity using documentation forged by Anita's last contact inside the resistance. No digital ticket, no boarding pass, everything handwritten, old school, invisible to tracking algorithms. They reached the airport. At midnight, Anita handed him a small envelope. Inside is the address, Lucas Elwood, Geneva. Sundar took it. Their eyes met one last time. You'll never hear from me again, she said. I know, Sundar replied. He boarded the private jet, heart pounding, mind spiraling, as the plane lifted off the runway and cut through the clouds. Sundar looked out the window and whispered to himself, this ends where it began. But just before sunrise, somewhere over Europe, the plane jolted violently. The cabin lights flickered. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. Mr. Pichai, we've been rerouted. Emergency airspace lockdown. I'm being ordered to land in Frankfurt. Sundar's breath caught. This wasn't an accident. Someone knew. Someone was waiting. The final choice. The plane landed hard on the wet tarmac of Frankfurt Airport. The sky was dark, full of storm clouds, and rain tapped rhythmically against the windows as the engines wound down. Sundar sat in his seat, still, his knuckles white, as he gripped the armrests. He had heard the pilot's voice again, too calm, too rehearsed. We've been instructed to taxi toward a private gate. He knew then. This wasn't a safety diversion. This was a trap. He quickly tucked the flash drive into the lining of his shoe, just behind the insole. He had worn these shoes deliberately, custom-made, with a hidden compartment. As the wheels stopped, he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the exit. Every step felt heavier, slower. His heartbeat was no longer pounding. It was quiet now. The kind of quiet that came when a man had made peace with the possibility that he might not walk out of this alive. On the runway below, a black van had pulled up. 4 men waited. They wore suits, but not corporate ones. They had the cold look of state-trained operatives. Not one of them smiled. As Sundar stepped onto the mobile stairs, one of the men walked forward and raised his hand. "Mr. Pichai," the man said, "you've been flagged for customs inspection." Sundar forced a thin smile. "Since when does customs drive a black van?" The man's face didn't change. "Please come with us." Sundar hesitated, but then, behind the men, a figure appeared. It was a woman in a security uniform. She moved differently, more fluid, more controlled. It took him a second to realize. It was Rhea, alive. Sundar's breath caught. He stepped down quickly. The operatives didn't react to Rhea. She wasn't part of their group. She kept her eyes straight, pushing a small luggage cart toward another gate, but as she passed near him, she whispered without turning her head, "Gate 26. 2 minutes. Run." Before the operatives could stop him, Sundar dropped his jacket, turned, and bolted into the side entrance of the terminal. The men shouted behind him, but he didn't look back. Adrenaline surged through him like a river. The door slammed behind him as he weaved through a maintenance hallway, ducking under pipes, slipping on wet tiles, pushing open an old security door till he found himself near Gate 26. The place was half empty. A regional flight to Zurich was boarding. The attendant blinked as he handed over a forged boarding pass from his jacket's hidden lining. The name read, Shyam Misra. No questions asked. Rhea had done this. She had faked her betrayal. She had fooled everyone, including him. Once on board, he collapsed into the seat and stared out the window. His chest heaved, his hands trembled, but he had made it. As the plane lifted into the stormy sky, Sundar clutched his shoe like a man holding a heartbeat in his palm. 2 hours later, he stood in the shadows of Geneva. The city was cold and silent, the streets lit by dim orange lamps. He moved cautiously. Every alley a possible threat, every car a potential tale. The address led him to a modest brick building tucked between a law office and a bookstore. There was no sign, no buzzer, only a wooden door with a lion's head knocker. He knocked once, then twice, then a third time slower. It opened. Lucas Elwood stood before him, tall, thin, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much of the world. He didn't speak. He only stepped aside, allowing Sundar to enter. The room inside was old world. Books lined the walls and candlelight flickered against the glass of ancient display cases. In the corner, a secured terminal sat on a wooden desk, powered and waiting. "You brought it?" Lucas asked finally. Sundar removed the shoe, pulled out the drive, and handed it over. Lucas connected it, fingers moving swiftly. Minutes passed. Then he looked up. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the whole thing." "How long until you can distribute it?" Sundar asked. Lucas glanced at the clock. 20 minutes. We have a multi-node architecture. Once it's triggered, it's out of their hands. It'll hit public developer forums, encrypted messaging apps, independent, whistleblower networks, and select investigative journalists. Even if they shut one node, 20 more will pop up. Sundar nodded, silent. He sat down in the corner, away from the screen, watching. Lucas worked without speaking. But then, as he was about to press the final key, a loud crash echoed through the building. They froze. The front door had been kicked in. Lucas turned to Sundar. "They found us." "How?" Sundar whispered. Lucas's voice was grim. "You were followed." The terminal still glowed. One final step. Just one. Lucas turned to Sundar. "Take the stairs in the back. They lead to the alley. You'll find a motorbike. My assistant left the keys in it. Ride north, reach the river, after that, disappear. What about the upload? Sundar asked. Lucas smiled. I've been waiting my whole life for this moment, let me do my part. Sundar ran. Behind him, the door splintered open, shouting, heavy boots. He reached the alley, found the bike, and kicked it to life. The engine growled, echoing between the stone walls as he sped into the night. The next day, the world changed. The files went live. Millions of downloads. Independent coders and journalists confirmed their authenticity. Reddit threads exploded. Forums lit up. Privacy activists called it the leak of the century. Google's boardroom went silent. CEOs across multiple companies denied involvement. But documents bore their names: funding logs, private meetings, contracts, and in the middle of the storm, Sundar Pichai vanished. No press conference, no final message. He was simply gone. Some said he died in the chase. Others believed he was taken. But those who knew the truth believed he was alive. That he had walked away from the empire he built to protect the very people who once called him a stranger in a boardroom full of wolves. Years later, in a small village near the Andes, a school for underprivileged children opened. Its founder was never seen publicly. But the students whispered about a tall man with quiet eyes who brought them books, helped fix their computers, and spoke rarely, but always kindly. They called him the man with the quiet fire, and somewhere, far away in a digital world he once ruled, the legacy of his choice continued to echo, not in code, but in truth.